All right, are we ready? Let your review commence now, right? So the first thing I want to do as part of your review is put all of the commission rules that we've talked about throughout the class into one place where you have a reference to go back and look at these things. I call this the nitpicky stuff in the class and on the exam, because these are the things that are easy to lose track of when you're trying to wrap your mind around so many important ideas. You know, when you're sitting there studying life estates, that's an idea-based thing. You got to understand the concept. Nothing in these rules is concept-based. This is memorization. Do you know explicitly what the rules are that they're going to test you on? And so I want to go back through those and give you, and that's why I put them in slides for you, so that you have kind of one condensed place to go back and reference those things. Because they are going to ask you questions about these things, and you need to know exactly what the answers are, so that you don't miss easy questions. Because I do call them the nitpicky section, but honestly, this is also the easy stuff because it's just straight memorization. There's no thinking involved, and you don't have to worry about missing the questions. You either know these or you don't. Fair enough? All right, so first thing, the requirement for a license. Remember, the basic definition of a broker in this state is any person or entity, and an entity is just a company, an LLC, a corporation, a partnership. Those are all examples of entities. So any person or entity that engages in real estate, so that's buy, sell, lease, list, exchange, any of those things, for somebody other than themselves and for payment, for compensation. Anybody who meets that criteria needs a real estate license in this state. So for example, an LLC that is going to be paid a listing commission. Does that LLC need a license? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So we run into this question all the time. Like, for example, we have real estate brokers whose accountants tell them, oh, well, you know, you should incorporate yourself. You should create an LLC because it's better for your tax purposes, or it's better for liability purposes. Because it does limit liability. And so they go create an LLC, and then they go tell their firm, I want you to pay my commissions to my LLC. I don't want you to pay them directly to me. I want you to pay my commissions to my LLC. Well, what are those commissions for? For a real estate transaction. So if that LLC is being paid commissions for real estate transactions, does that LLC need a license? It does. And when you start talking about types of licenses, there's only two types in North Carolina. There are either they're broker licenses or firm licenses. If it's a person, you get a broker's license. If it's anything other than a person, like an LLC, what kind of license do you get? A firm license. So what kind of license would that LLC that broker just created need in order to be paid those commissions? A firm license. You see how that works? So don't think of a real estate firm as just the place where you, like United Real Estate of Raleigh. That is a real estate firm. But how many firms within that firm do you think there are? Bunches. Because how many of my brokers do you think have LLCs that they want their commissions paid to? A lot of them. Because they all get the same advice from their accountants. So might there be 30 or 40 firm licenses within this building? Absolutely. Don't get confused and think, oh, there's just one, there's just the firm. That's not the way this works. Any entity that engages in the real estate business also needs a license. And there's only two types. It's the broker's license for people, and anybody other than people gets a firm license. Okay, is everybody good on that? Good. So if you wanted to create an LLC for yourself, guess what you would have to get? A firm license for it. That's exactly right.
Is that kind of like a different process than this?
Well, it is a different process in this because there's no way to make an LLC sit through a 75-hour class, right? We have classes and tests for the people, for the broker's licenses. a firm license is paperwork, because there's no way you can make a firm, an entity, sit through and take tests, because ultimately it would be a person sitting through and taking that test. So what do you think that means about the people who own that entity? They have to have what? They have to have a broker's license. So really the number one requirement for creating a firm is that whoever is creating the firm has what? A broker's license. And specifically, what kind of broker's license do you think we're going to require? A non-provisional one. It would have to be a non-provisional license. There you go. Yes. So Fred's question is, would they also have to become a BIC? The answer to that is, it depends. Not every firm has to have a BIC. Firms that represent clients, yes. There's basically a narrow exception that allows you to create a firm that doesn't have a BIC if the only reason you're creating it is to divert your commissions. You know, if the only reason the thing exists is to say, don't pay me, pay my LLC, then that firm doesn't have to have a BIC. Fair enough? Okay. So the reality is, if you wanted to create an LLC for yourself, all you would have to do is what?
Just get a firm license.
And but what's going to be the requirement to get a firm license? A non-provisional license. So go one step further. What would you have to do in order to create an LLC for yourself and have your commissions paid to it? You become a provisional first and then get rid of that provisional status. And how do you get rid of that provisional status? By finishing the post-licensing. Does that make sense for everybody? You just work your way through the process. And so in theory, could you go out and create an LLC for your commissions to be paid to a month after you get your license? Sure, if you wanted to push yourself through the post-licensing that quickly. Okay? All right, so a non-provisional broker is any licensee who's removed provisional status from their license, and you do that by completing 3 30-hour post-licensing classes. They are 30 hours each. A firm is any entity, so an LLC, a corporation. And by the way, let's talk about how you recognize the difference between an LLC, a corporation, and a partnership. You need to put this in your notes, okay? Because they like to throw this in there on the national section of the test. An LLC, a limited liability company, is created to, shockingly, limit liability. Okay? But also, corporations limit liability as well. So that's not the buzzword you're looking for. Remember I told you last week how they love to throw the same words into an answer choice that were in the question to fool you into choosing it, right? So do you think they might say, you know, which of the following business entities is created and composed of shareholders in order to limit liability, and then give you a limited liability company as an answer choice? And it would be wrong, because the key word there is not limit liability. The key word in that question is shareholder. Shareholders belong to corporations. Corporations have shareholders. LLCs have members and managers. So if you see composed of member managers, that's an LLC. Comprised of shareholders, that's a corporation. Everybody good with that? And comprised of partners would be a partnership. That one's pretty hard to hide because they have to say partners. LLCs have members and managers. For example, if you pull up the LLC that owns this real estate school, you will see that I am a manager of that LLC. A manager is just someone who has decision-making authority, whereas a member is an owner who doesn't have decision-making authority. Corporations would have shareholders, which also, if you're trying to tie it together and help remember, there's a form of ownership that involves shareholders, and it also starts with the word C. It sounds a lot like corporation. A co-op, right? That would be shareholders. So those things sound very similar, right? That's one way to remember that. So the buzzword for a corporation is going to be shareholders. Buzzwords for a LLC would be members and managers. So we talked about brokers, we talked about firms. Let's talk about this limited non-resident commercial license. If you break the name down into pieces, it tells you exactly what it is. It's limited, so that means you can only do it in certain areas of real estate. There are certain things you can do with it and certain things you can't do with it. It's for non-residents. Non-residents of what state? North Carolina. So these are people who live somewhere other than North Carolina. If you are a resident of North Carolina, you cannot have a limited non-resident license. If you're a resident of this state, what kind of license do you have to have if you want to practice real estate? You got to have a broker license. Okay? Is everybody good with that? Commercial. Well, that answers to what's it limited to. What kind of real estate can they practice? Just commercial. So a limited non-resident commercial license is a license that's issued to somebody who wants to practice commercial real estate brokerage in this state. And the requirements are two things. They have to have a license in another state that's in good standing. Any other state. Okay? So far, so good? And number two, they have to have a North Carolina broker who's willing to essentially sponsor them, to be responsible for them. Because the Real Estate Commission needs somebody to discipline if the thing goes badly. And they can't discipline somebody who doesn't have a North Carolina license. Remember, the only power the North Carolina Real Estate Commission has is like reprimand you, revoke your license, suspend your license. Well, they can only revoke a North Carolina license. They can only suspend a North Carolina license. So the North Carolina Real Estate Commission needs somebody who has a North Carolina license to be held responsible for this thing. Does that make sense? So you got to have a license in another state in good standing, and you got to be sponsored by a North Carolina broker here. If those two things are true, you can get one of these limited non-resident commercial licenses. But you can only practice what type of real estate? Commercial. I love watching Ashley highlight. She highlights every word on the page. I'm just trying to figure out how that actually works about making things stand. It helps you. Okay. All right. Good. I always look down and I'm like, how does she know what to look at? Because she highlighted everything. So. Oh, there you go. There you go. Is everybody good on the limited non-resident commercial license? Good. Okay. So provisional brokers. Let's elaborate on them. First thing is that a provisional license is always issued on inactive status. They're inactive. You can't use it until you do what? And get active. And how do you get active? No. See why we got to go through this? You hear how 46 different answers we get? You got to have a BIC. That's it. And if you don't know that, you need to make sure you commit it to your memory because you're going to see it. Okay? I cannot reiterate how nitpicky this stuff is because all those other things you said, guess what they're going to be? Answer choices. And they're wrong. How a provisional broker becomes active when their license is issued is to get a BIC. You don't need any other classes. When you get your license, you're current on all your classes. All your classes are knocked out for a little while. At least, right? At least how long? At least a year before you need to take any classes. So all you need to do to get to active status when you get your license is find a BIC. Okay? Because you can't be active without one as a provisional broker. If I make a point of saying you can't be active without a BIC as a provisional broker, what do you think that means for full brokers or non-provisional brokers? They don't need a BIC to be on active status. They do not need a broker in charge in order to be active. They can just declare themselves, I'm active. Provisional brokers need a broker in charge. Yes, ma'am. Can a provisional broker take a class to become a BIC? No. The first rule of becoming a BIC is you got to be non-provisional. Okay? So the first thing any provisional broker would have to do if they aspire to be a broker in charge is to finish their post-licensing and get rid of it. And then we'll talk about what the requirements are to become a BIC here in just a minute. But to get to non-provisional status, because remember, that's a different thing. Non-provisional status simply means you've gotten all the post-licensing done. So you can get to non-provisional status pretty quickly, right? know how often they have to take them. At least one per anniversary date. At least one per anniversary date. So any provisional broker who doesn't take one class by their first anniversary, 2 classes by their second anniversary, or 3 by their third would become inactive. Yes?
So the anniversary, is that after finishing the pre-licensing or actually passing the state?
That is the date you get your license. That is your anniversary date. The date your license is issued from the state. Which will be shortly after you pass the state exam. Usually next day. They usually issue the license the next day. But it'll be sometime right around when you pass the state exam. Everybody good on this so far? So let's talk about the dates. And gosh, if I could tell you to focus on one slide in this whole packet, this is the one. Yes?
So working with a BIC, right? Do you definitely have to work with a BIC, say, referral fees?
So your question is, what do I... You don't want to be active. That means you don't want to get paid.
Right, can you get paid referral fees?
What did I just say? You don't want to be active. So that means you don't want to get what? Because active is the stat, and see, that's why I want you to say, don't use that word casually. Active has nothing to do with how much you're actually working. Active is a license status. And and I have to be a jerk about this, because if I'm not, you will miss these questions on the exam because they're a jerk about the way they word them. Don't use words like current or active unless you know what they mean, because those are license statuses. That's actually going to be the next slide we talk about here. You have to know those meanings. So can you rephrase the question without using that word? Give me what you really mean. I know what you mean, but I want you to rephrase it without using that word.
To get paid any fee, you have to be active.
That's right. That's exactly right. You have to be on active status to get paid. Anything, including a referral fee. Okay? Now, if you want to get to the root of your question, do I need a BIC to be paid a referral fee? The answer is no. But you can't solicit for that referral fee. You can't advertise for it. You can't even have a business card. Okay. Go ahead.
Licensing, am I reading this right, where you have 3 years to complete your post-licensing?
You have 3 years to complete your post-licensing, because you must, to stay on active status, you must complete 1 by your what? First anniversary, 2 by your second anniversary, and all 3 of them by your third anniversary. So to remain on active status, you have 3 years to complete all 3 of them. But you have to do a minimum of 1 per year. Can you do them all in the first year? Yes. These are minimums. Okay? And you can't wait till do them all in the 3rd year either, not if you want to remain on active status, because you will fall inactive on your license anniversary date if you haven't completed 1 by the 1st, 2 by the 2nd, 3 by the 3rd. You'll fall to inactive status, which means you can't do any brokerage, you can't get paid, you can't do anything. Yes?
If you fall inactive, you have to take the whole thing again?
No. Inactive means you can't practice until you fix whatever made you inactive. So what would that mean doing? Taking the class, if that's why you fell inactive. Okay? So know these dates. First, yes, ma'am. You don't have this slide out. What did you get? The old one? Yeah, there you go. Caitlin, you need one?
Yes, please.
Is it worth $100 to you? $5? Not even $5? Gosh. Okay, so know these dates. You must, everybody, provisional or non-provisional, take CE by June 10th of each year. How many hours of CE? 8 hours. CE is not post-licensing. Post-licensing is not CE. So let me ask you this question. Does CE count as credit toward post-licensing? No, because I just said what? They're not the same thing. So what does that mean you have to do as a provisional broker? You have to take both. You have to take continuing education. You have to take post-licensing. What is the deadline for continuing education? June 10th. What is the deadline for post-licensing? Your anniversary date. Do not mix them up. They will on the test. They'll have everything correct, except they'll say you must take 30 hours of post-licensing by June 10th. You must take 8 hours of CE by your license anniversary date. Wrong. Both are wrong. Okay? Make sure you know these dates. The deadline for CE is June 10th. Now, I've got an important note right here. Provisional brokers. You get a free year. Your first year from taking CE. You do not have to take CE by the first June 10th deadline that you pass. So, it is what date right now? We are in October of 2017. Presumably, you're going to get your real estate license probably in late October, early November of 2017. What is the next CE deadline for everybody in the state? June 10th of 2018. That will not be your deadline. Your deadline will be June 10th of 2019. Okay? Your first license year. And your first license year always ends on what date? No. June 10th. Because CE is all about June 10th. Your first license year, you don't have to take CE. Okay? The license year for everybody, for CE purposes, ends on June 10th. And the first time around, you don't have to take CE. So what that means is it's always the second June 10th that you have a license is your deadline. And every June 10th after that. Yes?
Is this paid out of pocket, or is it some firms pay for you?
Paid out of pocket. Paid out of pocket. The question was, do you have to pay for your CE? And I've never seen a firm pay for it. So I suppose they could, but I've never seen one that would. Okay? Also, everybody's got to renew their license. And that date is June 30th. It would be nice if they made any of these dates the same, but they're not. And so you got to know all of them. The renewal, and renewing is just paying a fee. The renewal fee is $45 due by June 30th. Okay? Good on that.
So would we, like, say we got our license, like you said, like, end of October, early November, we would have to pay.
You will have to renew in June.
This one does not.
This one, you don't get a free year.
Okay.
You don't get a free year. I think the idea is that when it comes to CE, you should be up to date because you just took all the. I mean, the purpose of continuing education is to update, refresh, right? Well, you shouldn't need a refresher. You just got out of the class. And so that's the idea of them basically saying you don't have to take continuing education by that first deadline because you literally just finished at least 75 hours, in most cases more than 75, like we're doing 90 hours. You just finished 90 hours of education, so you shouldn't need a refresher. But renewal, they need their money. So you will pay even if you get your license issued on June 15th, guess what you got to do by June 30th? Pay that $45 renewal fee. You will pay that renewal fee by June 30th. How do you renew? You go on the Real Estate Commission's website and give them your credit card. That's it. That's it. No sending checks. Just give them your credit card. And you may not set it up for automatic. I wish you could. Yeah, you have to remember. Usually they open it on May 15th, so you have like 45 days to do it. Okay? Is everybody good on these dates? This is a big one. Make sure you have these dates ingrained in your memory because you're going to be asked. And the reason I say it's big, it's only one question, but it's so silly to miss one question where it's just such a straightforward thing as knowing a couple dates, right? Know your status. There are different statuses as far as the Real Estate Commission is concerned, and you need to know what the specific meaning of each one is because they will use them in very narrow context on the exam, and they expect you to know what they mean. Okay? Active. If you're on active status, you can get paid. You've done everything correctly. Active doesn't mean you've done one thing. It means you've done everything. So if you're a provisional broker, you've taken your post licensing. You've taken your continuing education. You've hung your license with a BIC if you're a provisional broker. And you have paid your renewal fee. So you've done everything correctly to get to active status. And what that gets you to is the ability to get paid. Any status other than active, you cannot be paid. Simple as that. Because that's a requirement for a license. The license is to do these things for other people and to get what? Paid for it. That's what the requirement for a license is. So if you own anything other than active, you can't be paid. Inactive status. You cannot be paid and you cannot perform brokerage activity. So what would get you to inactive status, do you think? Basically the opposite of everything in this list, right? If you don't take your CE, guess what happens? You go inactive. If you don't take post-licensing, guess what happens? You go inactive. If you're a provisional broker and you don't hang your license with a BIC, you go inactive. Now, this one does not apply though, because if you don't pay your renewal fee, look down here at the bottom. That's a special one. They got a special word for that. If you don't pay your renewal fee, you are expired. And you need to know that. That's not inactive. Okay? Expired is much worse than inactive. You can't lose your license for going inactive. You can always fix inactive. There's a point in time where you can't fix expired. You got to start over from the beginning. Pay them their money. They mean it. They're not playing.
So
Yes.
how would, like, okay, let's say that we got our license and we forgot to pay, so we became expired by June 10th.
June 30th. You would go expired on June 30th. You would actually go expired on July 1, but, you know, you have to pay by June 30th.
So if we realized it like just a couple days after, would they let us?
They will let you fix it. You have to pay the renewal fee plus a late fee at that point in time. And there's a certain amount of time where they'll let you do that. And then there's a certain amount of time where they'll let you pay the renewal fee and a late fee, and they'll make you take an extra post-licensing class as a punishment. And then there's a certain other period of time where they'll make you pay an extra 2 post-licensing classes as punishment. And there's a certain amount of time where they make you take all 3 of them. Even if you've already taken all 3 of them, you have to take all 3 of them over again as punishment. And then there's a certain period of time where they just say, go to pre-licensing. So the moral of that story is pay the $45. For the rest of your life, you will pay them $45 a year. Just chalk it up, okay? Because it's silly to lose all this effort and expenditure over $45 a year, okay? Is everybody good on what expired means? You didn't do what? Didn't pay by June 30th. Good, good. And current is just the opposite of expired. Current means you have paid. So could you be current and inactive? Yes, absolutely. Anybody who, for example, doesn't take their CE on an annual basis but just pays the renewal fee would be current inactive. We don't say current active because to be active, you definitely have to be current. Active encompasses all of that all in one word. Okay?
So to like fix inactive, you would just have to take what you haven't done. Right?
Most of the time to fix, so the question is, how do I fix inactive? Well, the most common reason for going inactive is not taking a class, either continuing education or post-licensing. You take what you missed. Now, in the case of CE, they make you take what you missed the previous year plus the current years before you. So if you missed taking your CE, how many hours of CE would you have to take to get back to active status? 16, because you have to take last year's and this year's, and then they'll let you be active again. But you don't need to know that. Okay? Everybody good on these? The statuses? Okay. So, what are the responsibilities of a broker in charge? Supervise all the brokerage activities of the firm. The second one is a big one. Approve all advertising done in the name of the firm. Look at the first thing on that list. Business cards. So this gets back to Salim's question earlier when he said, could a broker who did not have a BIC be paid a referral fee? My answer was what? Yes. A full non-provisional broker, because they can be on active status, and active means I can get paid. They can be paid a referral fee. but they can't advertise themselves in any way because advertising yourself takes who to approve it? A BIC. So could Salim have even a business card identifying himself as a real estate broker if he doesn't have a BIC? No. Can't do it because the BIC has to approve it. You can't possibly have any advertising that identifies yourself as a real estate broker unless you have a BIC, because it's the BIC's responsibility to approve that advertising. So, yes, a full broker, a non-provisional broker, can be active without a BIC, but what they can do is very, very, very limited. They can't represent clients. They can't do listings. They can't represent buyers. And they can't identify themselves as brokers in any advertising. So, yeah, I can accept a referral fee. It would pretty much have to be somebody who knew I was licensed, came to me and said, hey, Salim, I know you got your real estate license, but you don't sell. Do you mind recommending me to somebody who could sell my house for me? In that case, you'd be okay accepting a referral fee.
This was a non-provisional.
Non-provisional, because provisional brokers can't be active without what? Provisional brokers can't be active without a BIC, right? So definitely is non-provisional. Okay. Other things that the BIC is responsible for, and they don't seem straightforward. Who's responsible for making sure that brokers take their CE? Is it the brokers or is it their BIC? The BIC. Who's responsible for making sure brokers pay their renewal fee? Is it the brokers or is it their BIC? Their BIC. And here's why. The firm represents the clients, right? Who is doing the work in the name of the firm? The brokers are. Who's responsible for all of that? The broker in charge. So it's the broker in charge's responsibility to make sure they're not sending an inactive broker out there to represent the firm and represent the clients. Does that follow? All of that falls to the broker in charge. And if you're zoning out on any of this, you better tune the hell back in, because they're going to test you on all of this nitpickiness. Every single bit of this. You have to know. The BIC is responsible for all of that stuff. Okay?
Now, does the BIC get punished if somebody, like, fails to take it? Like, not that they send somebody that's inactive out, but if somebody was just really stubborn, like the BIC was like, hey, take this, like, pay your renewal.
As long as the BIC does what?
As long as they don't send an inactive broker.
As long as the BIC makes sure that they are not representing clients, then the BIC's done what they're supposed to do. So, but the BIC has to stay on top of it to know. So to know, oh well, the deadline passed. You didn't take your CE. You do not talk to any more clients.
Is that like the scenario the other week?
I'm sorry.
The scenario the other week that you came in here mad about?
Yes, exactly. That's the scenario the other week where I had somebody who had not taken a post-licensing class. That's exactly right. That same scenario. They didn't take post-licensing. It's the responsibility of the broker in charge to know that and to make sure that they're not conducting brokerage activity while they're on inactive status because they haven't, taken their class. Okay? What are the qualifications to become a BIC? First of all, you have to be non-provisional. Hopefully that goes without saying, right? You can't be a provisional broker and be the broker in charge. So you've got to get rid of that provisional status. There's also an experience requirement here, though. You need 2 years of active full-time experience. Well, active just means you're on active status. Full-time means you're actually participating in real estate transactions full-time. They give you a number of hours that equates to. So you have to have a certain number of hours. It's not a number of transactions, it's a number of hours. So you basically have to show that you have 2 years worth of full-time experience within the previous 5 years. What else did we talk about last week that there was a rule you had to have 2 years within the previous 5 years? Capital gains. For it to be your what kind of property? Your primary residence, you have to have lived in it for 2 of the previous 5 years. So this rule is exactly the same here. To be a broker in charge, you have to have 2 years of active full-time experience within the previous 5 years. Okay?
So if right after you become non-provisional and you have that 2 years, then you can become a BIC. So you don't have to be in the business for 5 years.
Nope.
You just have to be full-time active.
That's right. And your time as a provisional broker counts. The clock is running. As long as you're actively engaged in the business full-time, then your clock's running. So, for example, as soon as you get your license, you hang it with a firm and you start working, and you're working full-time real estate, you're counting. Even as a provisional broker, that 2 years worth of active full-time experience is counting. So you could, in theory, remove your provisional status one day and become BIC the next day.
Okay.
Because as long as you meet the requirements of having 2 years worth of full-time experience in the previous 5 years, that's it. So you could become a BIC on year 2, day 1, in theory, if you hit it running. Okay? Once you have declared yourself the BIC, you have to take a 12-hour class from the Real Estate Commission. You actually get to take the class after you have declared yourself the BIC, and you have 120 days to take that class. So 120 days from the time you declare yourself, then you can take the class. All right? You got that long, 4 months.
Firm have more than one BIC?
A firm may not have more than one BIC, because the definition of a firm is a BIC, basically. Now, I could have multiple firms within the same office. So don't think of a firm as an office. You have to get out of that thinking, right? Could I conceivably have a different BIC in this office just for the provisional brokers? Yes. Could I have a different BIC for the brokers who've had their license for 10 years or more? Sure. So I could have multiple BICs within the same office. We could all be United Real Estate of Raleigh, but all separate BICs within that, because I could have 3 separate firms. So a firm cannot have more than one BIC, because the definition of a firm is an office supervised by a BIC.
Okay. But I guess I should rephrase it, an agency.
Could an office could have more than one BIC? Absolutely, because they could break it down in any way they wanted to. You could technically have 3 firms all doing business as Keller Williams Carey. Okay? Unlicensed employees, what can they do? The answer is pretty much anything that a broker can do, except these 2 things at the bottom. So if I have an unlicensed employee as a real estate broker, they can do anything I can do except negotiate or show property that is for sale. Can they show property that's for rent?
Yep.
They can. Can they manage a trust account? Yep. Can they enter listings in the MLS? Yes, all of those things. They can collect rent, they can collect security deposits, they can schedule appointments, they can do any of that stuff. They cannot negotiate, and they cannot show properties that are for sale. Those are the 2 things. Everybody good with that? Okay. So what are the exemptions to needing a license at all? What if I want to practice real estate and I don't want to get a real estate license and I still want to be paid for it? Pretty much the exemption you need to be aware of is you can be the salaried employee of the owner of the property. That's the big exemption. The salaried W-2 employee of the owner of the property. So if I want to be a property manager, but I don't have a real estate license, who would I have to work directly for? The owner. So whatever corporation owned that apartment building, I'd have to be a salaried employee of that corporation. Could I then perform all the functions of a property manager and be paid for it? As long as I'm paid as what kind of an employee? A W-2, salaried W-2. Good. Good. Trustees with estates, for example, don't need a real estate license. So if you were the executor or executrix is like my favorite word in the world. I don't know why. It just sounds awesome. It's just a female executor. We have different genders for them. I don't know why. But if you're the executor or executrix of an estate, for example, and you need to sell the property, you don't need a real estate license for that. How about attorneys? Attorneys who are engaging in the real estate business, do they need a license? Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Now, they don't need one if they're doing something like executing an estate. You know, if they're doing the same thing, they're just selling it because it's part of the estate and they've been hired to be the executor of the estate, they don't need a real estate license. But if they're engaging in the business and charging fees for it, they absolutely do need a real estate license. Okay? They don't get an exemption. So the commissioners themselves, let's talk about the makeup of the real estate commission. First of all, you have to know all 9 of these people by face because you have to identify them. They have a little thing where you have to draw lines to which one is, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Kidding. There is a difference between the commission, capital C, the real estate commission with a capital C, and the real estate commission staff. If you were to go down Navajo Drive today, that way, those people working over there, that's the staff. The people that are in that building today, those are the staff. There's 100 of them, roughly-ish, something like that. That's where all the licensing officers and the auditors, investigators, and the education staff, and the receptionists, and, legal affairs, all those people work full-time for the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. That is their job. That is not these 9 people. These 9 people do not work for the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. They are the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. These are political appointees. This is a free volunteer job. They are appointed by the governor and the North Carolina House of Representatives and the North Carolina Senate. And they serve 3-year terms. They can be reappointed. But that's a voluntary thing. Now, if you want to meet these 9 people, you'll go down to the other end of Navajo. Maybe we'll do that on Wednesday morning. How many of y'all would like to take a field trip to a commission meeting on Wednesday morning? Maybe we'll do that. They have a meeting on Wednesday. Y'all want to do that? I'll send them a note and see how they would like that. They might actually be okay with that. So we'll see about that. We might make a field trip Wednesday morning for a little while anyway. It gets old after a little while, but these are the current 9 members of the Real Estate Commission. And if you want to meet these people, you will go down there once a month on Wednesdays because they come in from around the state and they have a meeting. Their function is to make the rules. These are the people who make the rules. The commission staff are the people who enforce the rules. These are also the people who would decide on your fate if you were accused of breaking the rules. So they make the rules, and then if you are accused of breaking the rules, the staff basically creates a disciplinary action case, and then these people would hear that case and make a decision about what to do with your license. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay, so these people rotate on and off, and they are super nice. I like all of them.
Do all of them have to have a license?
That's a really good question. Ariana's question is, do they all have to have a license? And actually, they can't all have a license. There is a rule that we have to have at least 2 of them at any given time who have no affiliation whatsoever with the real estate industry. And the idea there is that we don't want completely just real estate brokers, disciplined real estate brokers. We want kind of the perspective of the public, so to speak. So there are always at least 2 at-large members who cannot have a real estate license. What that means is that there's usually 7 that do have one and 2 that don't, but there is at least 2 at any given time who don't have a real estate license. Okay?
This is free?
I'm sorry?
Free?
They do it for free, yes. I mean, they are compensated mileage and travel to get here and stay overnight because their meetings are 2 days. It's a Wednesday, Thursday, once a month. But that's a voluntary political appointment. Yep. Okay? So what can they do? What disciplinary authority do they have? Well, they have the authority to reprimand licensees, suspend licensees, revoke licenses, fine timeshare developers, and only timeshare developers. They can never fine a licensee. Is everybody good with that? Okay, so no fining of licensees. They can fine timeshare developers, but they cannot fine licensees. Yep.
I'm just trying to remember, wasn't it $500 per person that the unlicensed timeshare advertises to?
For a violation.
$500 per violation.
Yeah.
So a timeshare developer can be fined up to $500 per violation, but no maximum fine.
Oh, okay.
So if there's 20 violations, no, it's just a straight $500, okay? But if there's 20 violations, they can be fined $500 for each one of them. So the maximum fine for any single violation is $500. But, like, for example, if they put you in there selling timeshares, well, you're unlicensed at this point in time, and you met with 20 people today, they could be fined $500 for every single person you met with, because that's 20 separate violations.
And if I remember correctly, it wouldn't be me, right?
It would not be you, it would be the developer themselves. That's the only person or entity they can find is the timeshare developer themselves.
Thanks, I just want to make sure I remember.
Yep, good. I'm glad you asked. Okay. Prohibited acts by licensees, things that you're going to come across on a test that you should not do as a licensee. Well, obviously violating any commission rule is a bad idea. So anything that you find in Rule A-101, which is the North Carolina Licensed Broker Rule, you don't need to know that, but if you see it, don't freak out and go, oh, I don't know what Rule A-101 is. That's just the licensure rules for the Real Estate Commission. Practice of law. Don't give legal advice, and don't, above all things, do what? Draft contract language. That is a huge no-no. Don't draft contract language or give legal opinions. Self-dealing. Self-dealing is defined as doing anything that advantages you over your client. So an example of self-dealing would be you go into a listing presentation and you're having a conversation with the seller, and while you're having the conversation, you realize, I really do like this house. I want to buy this house. What should you do at that point in time? Not take the listing, stop the conversation, let them know, hey, don't tell me anything else because I want to make an offer on your property. You should never take that listing because you're going to have a big conflict of interest. Does that make sense? So that'd be an example of self-dealing. Or making an offer on behalf of your sister on one of your listings and never informing the seller that this offer was coming from your sister. That'd be another example of self-dealing. And then the biggest one is probably, and you'd be shocked that we actually have to put this up here, we have had brokers in this state who have tried to do dual agency when they were selling their own house. I'm listing my house for sale, and a buyer comes in who doesn't have an agent, and I have the nerve to tell them, I'd be glad to represent you in the transaction.
Just sign this document.
No, don't do that. Please, don't do that. Yes, Ariana.
Now, if you are a broker and you're representing clients, but you're looking to buy a house, not necessarily one that your agency has listed or anything that, any sellers have, like properties that you're listing.
Right.
Are you still allowed to practice if you're looking to buy it?
Sure. So Ariana's question is basically, do I have to cease my real estate practice because I'm in the hunt for a house for myself? And the answer is no. As a matter of fact, if you found a house that you wanted to make an offer on that was listed by your firm, you would just need to be very clear and make sure that whoever's communicating with the seller is very clear that the buyer is a broker affiliate of the firm. And so you could still make an offer, but just make it very clear that the seller understands where this buyer's coming from. What you wouldn't want to do is engage in that transaction personally on both sides. You wouldn't want to be the listing agent and be making an offer on the property. That gets way too close to home. Okay? Everybody good with that? Yeah, I can't believe we have to talk about that rule, but people do it, or have tried to do it.
What if you're representing yourself, you're taking yourself to listings because you're searching for a home?
Uh-huh. No, so the question is, can I represent myself as a buyer? And the answer is absolutely yes. I would just always, again, when I did present an offer, I would make it clear to the listing agent, the seller, whoever I'm communicating with, that I'm representing myself. In case you didn't notice, and there's a place on the contract at the very end where it asks, who we're going to send notice to, and it basically asks the broker to list their name and contact information and how they're functioning. Are they functioning as a buyer's agent? So in theory, the listing agent's going to see, well, the buyer and the agent are the same person here. But I would just put it in an email, FYI, this is me. I'm making an offer. I'm representing myself. And you can show yourself houses. And remember that you are a client, no different than any other client. So and this gets messed up all the time in our business. My own agents do it all the time because it's so hard for them to remember this. They'll make an offer on a property. And I'll say, where's your buyer agency agreement? Well, I don't have one. It's me. So what? You still need a buyer agency agreement because who's actually representing them as a buyer? The firm is, and the firm needs a buyer agency agreement. Do you still need a listing agreement if you're going to list your home for sale? Yeah. Absolutely, because it's the firm that's listing that house for sale. You still need a listing agreement. So it's absolutely fine to represent yourself, but you still need a buyer agency agreement. You still need a listing agreement. You still got to fill out the Working with Real Estate Agents brochure. You treat yourself. The Real Estate Commission says you're wearing two hats. You're wearing the buyer hat. You're also wearing the agent hat, and you got to treat yourself as a client.
Basically, you take all the steps you would as if you were representing somebody else.
Same exact steps for yourself. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You are just doing both roles.
Is that frustrating?
It can be. Well, I will say this. It's hard to take your own advice sometimes. When you're representing somebody else, I find it easier to tell them the hard truths. You know, sometimes it's easy for me to look at a buyer and say, do you want it or not? I mean, what are we screwing around here with? I mean, you know, you got 6 other offers, and you're dilly-dallying around about $500. Do you want the house or not? See, it's easy to do when it's not my emotions tied of it. When I'm the one buying it, I'm sitting there arguing with myself over the $500 when I know that would not be my advice if I had somebody. So it is kind of tough sometimes. And there are times when it's just not the smart thing to do. You know, if I was buying a house, of course I'm going to represent myself. If I'm selling a house, of course I'm going to represent myself because I trust my judgment in those settings. If I was buying a commercial property, I'd have a buyer's agent. Even though I've worked in commercial real estate, it's not my expertise. It's not where truly I'm an expert. So you always have to look at it that way too. Okay? And then obviously misrepresentation and omission, which we've talked about. Make sure you know how to recognize those because those are violations of commission rule as well. Reporting requirements. When you have to tell the real estate commission stuff. Well, if you move, you have 10 days to tell them. If you beat somebody in the street with a bat, you have 60 days to tell them. I don't know why. I'm just kidding. Please don't do that. You know, I never have quite figured out why you have so much longer to report something truly awful. But that's the way the rules work. You have 10 days to tell them if you changed addresses, and you have 60 days after the conviction, not after the charge, but after the conviction, to tell them if you are convicted of a crime. You know, and of course, they can take disciplinary action if you are convicted of a crime. It usually does trigger at least some disciplinary action where they would see if they needed to suspend your license or do anything like that.
What if you forget to report that you changed the address?
Then they do not fine you. So what is in there? If you forget to report that you moved within 10 days, what's in their repertoire? What could they do? They could reprimand, suspend, revoke. That's their 3 choices in any given case. That's it. Okay? Advertising and record keeping. First of all, recognize that advertising is a form of records. So we have to keep those records. And the rule for record retention for brokers in North Carolina is 3 years. We keep all records for a period of 3 years from the time we stopped providing brokerage service. So if we are working with a client and we close today, we have to keep all of those records for 3 years from today. Not 3 years from the time we got the records, but 3 years from the time we stopped working with the client. And advertising is part of that record keeping. Now, who's responsible for approving all advertising? The BIC is. You need to know what a blind ad is and how to recognize a blind ad. Blind ads are prohibited. They're against the rules. You cannot do blind ads in North Carolina. A blind ad is any ad that does not identify one of 2 things. Doesn't have to be both, but it has to be one of the 2. Either the broker or the firm. And when I say broker, it can't be provisional. So either the broker or the firm. So look at these 2 ads, very similar. 148 Main Street, 3-bedroom, 3-bath, 1,850 square feet, $178,000. Call Bob Kastner, comma, broker. That's an allowable ad. And what makes it allowable is Bob Kastner, comma, broker. And that's exactly how it would have to show up. You can't just say Bob Kastner. Because the natural question is, well, who's Bob? Right? If you're looking at that ad, in fact, if you look at the second one, call Bob. Who is Bob? Could be the owner, right? You have no earthly idea that that phone call you're making is to a real estate broker. What's another way we could say this ad that would be legal? Could we say call Bob at United Real Estate of Raleigh? Would that be a legal ad? Yes, because the firm is identified. It's got to be one or the other, either the broker, clearly identified as a broker, or the firm, one of the two, to make it a legal ad. Okay, so make sure you're good with identifying one that's not legal. Disclosing compensation. We always have to disclose our compensation in writing. No later than when? Time of offer. Remember, that's magic time. Almost everything is no later than time of offer, and disclosing compensation is no different. In writing could be an email. Could it also be on the buyer agency agreement? Yeah? Could it be on the listing agreement? Yeah, be anywhere in writing, except one place. Where can it not be disclosed? On the sales contract. Never, ever do you put commission on a sales contract. It cannot be there. No reference to it, no matter how well-meaning. People say, well, I was doing it because the rule said I had to disclose my commission. Yes, but there's also another rule that says don't talk about commission on the sales contract. So, do you have to disclose your commission? Yes, but do you do it on the sales contract? No, never. Okay? Everybody good on that rule? Handling trust money. For the most part, any money we touch that belongs to somebody other than ourselves goes in a trust account. The one big exception here is a due diligence fee. We are allowed to basically transition the due diligence fee from the seller to, where does it go? I mean, from buyer to seller, right? We're allowed to basically handle that check and get it from the buyer to the seller. But pretty much any other money, if we touch it, it is going in a trust account. So, tenant security deposits, earnest money deposits, rent, HOA dues, all that goes into a trust account or escrow account. They mean exactly the same thing. So, how do we recognize it as a trust account? What are the rules? Number one, it's got to be in a bank. Because banks have what kind of insurance? It's in this last bullet point down here. They have FDIC insurance, and that bank has to be doing business in the state of North Carolina. What do we call it anytime we have an imbalance in a trust account, when there's the wrong amount of money in a trust account? Commingling. Commingling is any imbalance in a trust account. Can we keep some of our own money in a trust account in North Carolina?
Yes.
Up to $100. Can it be interest bearing? Yes. Yes, trust account may be interest bearing. That is completely allowed. And who would keep the interest? The firm or whoever owns the trust account. Whoever's managing the trust account would keep it. Okay? All checks and deposit slips, statements, basically any paper associated with that account must clearly say what? Trust account. Everything's got to be labeled trust account. We don't have to have one. And you don't have to have more than one. If you're handling like property management and sales, do you have to have separate trust accounts for that? No. You do not have to have a trust account. You either don't handle money or you have a trust account. So if you handle money, you have to have one. So absolutely. So for example, who could we have hold the earnest money deposit so we didn't have to deal with them? Closing attorney would serve as a trustee in that case, right? The escrow agent. You could have somebody else hold it. Basically, there's one area of real estate that you simply can't practice without a trust account, and that's property management. Because property management, you're going to be holding tenant security deposits, you're going to be collecting rent, all of that has to go in. Sales, you can kind of avoid having a trust account if you don't want to. Do I have one? I have one that has no money in it other than my $100, and has been that way for years because I used to do property management. And I just have kept the trust account in case I ever needed it, but it literally just sits there with the $100 in it, and I balance it once a month. It takes all of 8 seconds to balance it. No money in, no money out, $100. Woohoo, you know. I do not keep one for the firm. No, we have the closing attorneys hold earnest money. We good? Okay. Funds can be dispersed at closing or when both parties agree. Never before. Either at closing or when both parties agree. When could, like, a tenant security deposit be released? When does a lease close? When the tenant does what? Moves out. That's when that's right. So you can touch the money as soon as the tenant moves out, but you have to send the tenant a breakdown within how many days? 30 days. You have to send the tenant a breakdown within 30 days of what you did with that tenant security deposit. But you can never touch the money until the tenant actually vacates the property. You can never disperse disputed funds. If the buyer says, no, they can't have my earnest money, I don't care what the contract says, what do you do with the money? You hold it until they agree. You hold it until they agree. Never give away disputed funds. All right? Because it belongs to both of them. That's the whole point of having it in a trust account. How long do we have to deposit trust money? 3 banking days. And it's 3 banking days after we've received the money and we're under contract. It's got to be both. Now, can you deposit earlier? Yes. You can deposit as soon as you get the money, as soon as you get the check. But the question is about when does the clock start to tick for the deadline that you have to deposit the money. And that clock is not ticking until you have the money and you're under contract. So it's whichever one of those happens later. Because I could get the check before we go under contract, and the clock hasn't started to tick. We could go under contract and I don't yet have the check. Guess what? Clock still hasn't started to tick. It's got to be both. Money and under contract. If you ever see a question about provisional brokers turning over money, though, they do it when? Immediately. Immediately. And then the last slide, BPOs, broker price opinions, which is just really a CMA but done for pay, right? How did I tell you to differentiate between CMAs and BPOs? A CMA is an opinion of value you do for who? A client. A client, seller, buyer. That's a CMA. A broker price opinion is an opinion of value you do for somebody who's not a client, somebody you don't represent, and they're paying you a fee for that. First rule, cannot be done by provisional brokers. Provisional brokers may not do broker price opinions. And if a non-provisional broker does them, then they have to use this language right here. Probable sales price or probable leasing price. So non-provisional brokers can do these, but only if they use that specific language. Probable sales prices. That's for a non-provisional. Provisionals can't do them at all. Provisionals may not do broker price opinions at all. Can a provisional broker do a CMA? Yes. They just can't be paid for it. They can't be paid a fee for it. They can certainly do a CMA. That's it. Okay?
Sorry, but a provisional broker can do a CMA but can't be paid, but cannot do a BPO.
Right, because a BPO is defined as being paid for an opinion of value. It's not a BPO if you're not paid for it. That's why we say provisionals can't do BPOs, because they can't be paid for that service. Good? All right, let's take a break.